Hi guys, how are you this evening? Tonight I thought I would share some of my favorite books with you. Let's light some candles so we can have some more light getting in here. We have one candle. Which we are going to put right here. There's a lot of moving around going on. I apologize. There we go. Nice and cozy. And the second one I'm going to light for you once I find the matches again. Here they are. I hope everyone is doing well this evening. It has been wonderful where I live, and so I spend a lot of time reading outside today. I'm reading a very heavy non-fiction book by Oliver Sacks, a psychologist, and so my brain needs some space and some time to kind of, process everything I'm reading. There we go. Let's try that. There's some light. Okay. This is going to be a two-part video. Or not. It's going to be a two-part series in a sense. The first part is going to be books that I loved when I was really, really young. So early childhood through elementary school. And then the next section will be late middle school through to the present. This video is going to include a lot of tapping, tracing, sounds, some page turning, and maybe even some whispered reading. Okay. So the first couple of books are books that I loved when I was a little girl, 4 or 5. I've always loved fairy tales, and these books are fairy tales, and each one is actually a different story. Due to the lighting, I'm not going to be able to show you the pictures very well, and that's only because I want the lighting to be as comfortable for you as possible. Okay, the first one is The Frog Prince. Now if you can see the picture, it says the little frog prince. This story is The Frog Prince. However, instead of the Frog Prince being under a spell and having to get the kiss of a princess to turn back to a prince, he is a frog who ends up marrying a frog. And the story begins with a beautiful princess losing her golden ball to a pond. And this frog hears her crying, and he asks her, "What's the matter?" And she says, "Oh, I've lost my golden ball in the pond. Could you fetch it for me?" And then she says, "Well, if you do that, I will let you be my friend, and you can sleep in the castle, and you can eat at my table." And the frog gladly catches the ball for her, but then she becomes disgusted with him when he's eating, and she doesn't want him to sleep in her room, and he feels just so bad and so forgotten. And then the king, when the frog decides to leave, and says he's going to go seek a princess who can see the good in me, The king gives him everything that he can, good clothes, a good horse. And the frog leaves, and he encounters some issues along the way. First there are two trolls, and he has to save a little bird while trying not to get beaten by the trolls. He comes across a witch who wants to eat him, and he has to race away very, very quickly. And then he gets to a point in the forest. This is one of my favorite pictures in the book, where the trees at the top get so full that the birds have to pick away so that some light can get through. And then in order to cross the seas to get to the next kingdom, the frog rides the back of sea turtles. And eventually it begins to get dark, and he's cold and he's tired, and he lays down and sleeps. And in the morning he finds that he's at the foot of a beautiful castle, and he wanders inside and he finds a beautiful princess sleeping, frog princess, and he wakes her up with a kiss, and they get married. And it looks to be a wonderful, fun festival, a fun little party. And the frog and his princess live happily ever after. I've always loved very luscious, beautiful, decadent pictures, and I think this book has beautiful illustrations. Okay. The next one is Rumpelstiltskin. Rumpelstiltskin always scared me just a little bit. And the fact that the woman made a promise to give her firstborn child to Rumpelstiltskin always made me a little scared. But this story has a happy ending. This story begins with a beautiful, beautiful daughter who can spin gold. Oh. And one day, her father is talking to the king and says how wonderful his daughter is at spinning straw into gold. And the king says, well, if she could just spin all of this into gold, that would be wonderful. But the girl gets upset, of course, and Rumpelstiltskin comes in to help. And the girl answers that she will give him her necklace if he helped. And so it happens that he does, and then she does. And then the king is so pleased with the room full of gold that he tells her to spin this one. And again the girl is distraught, but the little man comes to help, and she gives him her ring. And finally, the king finds her again, and he is amazed. And on the third night he says, if you can spin this room into gold, you will become my wife. And the girl just feels so sad, and she's hopeless, and the little man comes to help her again, and he says, well, what would you give me if I help you? What about your firstborn child? And because she doesn't believe that it will ever actually happen in the near future, she agrees. But lo and behold, the whole room gets spun into gold, and the beautiful daughter marries the king. And then she has a little baby, and Rumpelstiltskin comes, and he wants the child. But the daughter was so upset. Well, the queen now was so upset, and Rumpelstiltskin took pity on her, and he said, I will give you 3 days. If you do not know my name by the end of 3 days, I will take your child. And so the queen gets so upset, and she tries to think of all of the possible names. She comes up with names like Caspar, Melchior, or Balthazar. On the second night, she comes up with even wilder names, such as Beastie Ribs, or Lego Ram, or String of Bones. And on the third night, the queen was so frightened that she would lose her child, that she sent her trusted and most favorite maid to go find Rumpelstiltskin, to find out his name. The servant does. She finds him dancing around a fire on a wooden spoon, and he says his name. He says, "Oh, lucky me, for no one knows that Rumpelstiltskin is my name." And that night, when he comes, the queen says, "You will not take my child, for I know your name is Rumpelstiltskin." And Rumpelstiltskin gets angry and he leaves. And the queen and her king and their baby live happily ever after. Rumpelstiltskin appeared, was not heard from ever again. I love the pictures in that book too. Now the next book, the next 2, are actually 2 of my most favorites. They're illustrated by the same person, and the illustrations are beautiful. They're illustrated by K.Y. Graham, and her pictures are beautiful and fairy tale-like and ethereal. This first one is Cinderella. Now, this book is an A cover, and I'm surprised the cover has lasted as long as it has. Now, we all know the story of Cinderella, but I think this was my most favorite retelling. Cinderella, Cinderella. Here is where she meets the prince for the first time. Well, she's doing wash. It's a beautiful, soft picture. And she helps her stepsisters get ready for the ball. And of course, Cinderella isn't invited. But then, the fairy godmother comes and helps Cinderella. I love this picture because it's a very fairy-looking picture. Very different than the normal godmother or grandmother outfit that we see. Oh, and here she is, creating the carriage. These pictures are beautiful, aren't they? And here is Cinderella in her most beautiful gown. And look, her little glass slippers. Now in this story, the ball lasts for 2 days. And so this is the first evening. And there goes the carriage over to the castle, to the ball. Oh, and here is the ball. It looks beautiful and decadent, and Cinderella's glorious dress has center stage. Yep. And here she is at midnight with the pumpkin and her dress. But then, here she is with the prince on the second evening. It's It's another beautiful dress, isn't it? But it's on this evening that she loses her shoe. There's the shoe right there. And there's the prince running to catch her. And the prince searches through the entire land to try to find the girl who fits the shoe. And Cinderella and her stepsisters trying the shoe. But of course, Cinderella's not allowed to try it on until she declares that, oh, I have the other one. And there's Cinderella and her prince, married and happily ever after. I think the movie with Lily James and Helena Bonham Carter was absolutely beautiful, and I love the theme of have courage and be kind. It's very important, don't you think? This next one, I have mentioned before that I'm writing a book, right? This is the story that I'm rewriting, or writing a modern revision of. It's also in a sleeve to help protect it, and it's also by K.Y. Craft. And this, friends, is Sleeping Beauty. Probably my most favorite story, and probably one of my most favorite Disney movies. Now this story is a little different because it starts off with the queen sitting by the stream, very, very upset that she couldn't have children. And a little mouse hears her wish, and it comes true. Oof. And there, the queen has a little baby. Finally, after years and years of waiting. And they name the child Aurora. But oh, here comes the evil fairy. And the evil fairy is very, very scary. She declares that on her 16th birthday, the princess will prick her finger and die. But then the very final fairy at this party says she will not die, but simply fall into a deep sleep. And there, in the center of this picture, is this ethereal other fairy, consoling the grieving parents. Which is very sticky. And Aurora grows into a beautiful, beautiful girl with golden hair and a sweet disposition. One of the most beautiful and kind people in all of the world. And on the day of the 16th birthday, she's left all alone in the castle. Now, was that a good idea? I don't know. But she wanders up to the top of the castle and finds an old woman spinning. And she, through the power of the old woman, is convinced to place her finger on the spindle. She falls asleep. And when the king and queen get home, they find everybody asleep, and they become terrified and upset. And they find their dear sweet Aurora fast asleep. And they carry her up to her room and cover her in. Cover her all up with her blankets. And the curse included that the princess be kissed by true love to be awakened. And so the 12th fairy placed a protective spell on the kingdom so that nobody would die or grow old and die while the spell was there. And so then after Aurora was all asleep, and it had been years and years, the king and queen slept and slept and slept, never sure when they would wake up to find their daughter. Years went by, and eventually a prince was in the area, and he heard of the kingdom, and he vowed that he would go find the princess. And there's the kingdom all covered with trees. And at the very tippy top is a teeny tiny little tower. And he decides that that's where he's going to go. And so the prince works his way through the bushes to find the castle. And finally, he finds the room where Aurora is sleeping, and he falls instantly in love with her. And he wakes her up, and they get married. For no one is nearly as beautiful as Aurora. And they lived happily ever after. I love those pictures. K.Y. Craft does an incredible job of captivating the magic and delicacy of fairy tales. Okay, the next one is a movie that just recently came out, and it's also probably another one of my favorite Disney movies. And this one is interesting because instead of people as main characters, they're animals. And this one is Bunny and the Beast. Bunny and the Beast. This one is also in a sleeve, and again I'm amazed at how long it has lasted. And there are the pictures of Bunny and the Beast. These pictures are also luxurious and decadent and all kinds of whimsical. So Bunny lived with her father, who was an incredible merchant, and they had all kinds of manner of beautiful things. This here, that's Bunny, and those over there are her two stepsisters. Or her two sisters, I'm sorry. And eventually they had to move, but they moved to a little cottage out in the forest. And the father had to go on a journey. And he asked each of the girls what they wanted on his return. The sisters asked for gold and silver and beautiful gowns and jewels, but Bunny just asked for a rose. And along the way, the merchant finds the castle with enchantments and glorious foods and all manner of beauty and wonder. And as he winds his way through the castle, he comes across the rose garden, and he remembers his promise to Bunny, and he picks a rose, but the Beast finds him. And he says, "You must come back or send someone in your place." And the merchant is terrified, he is upset. But Bunny says she decides to go in his place because she loves her father. And so she takes off for the castle. When she gets there, she finds a room all ready for her, filled with all manner of beautiful gowns. Eventually, she settles on a beautiful yellow one and goes to explore the grounds. in the garden, and all along the castle. And she sits down to dinner. The Beast is there. And they have a dinner, but he doesn't really eat. And at the end of the evening, the Beast asks Bunny if she will marry him, and he says, well, no. The next morning, Bunny spent the day reading, in more glorious gowns, and in more luxurious beauty. And they dance, the Beast and the Bunny. And every evening he asks her, will you marry me, Bunny? And she says no. They walked in the moonlight, and every evening they talked and enjoyed each other's company. They grew to be the best of friends. Eventually, Bunny needs to go home, and the Beast lets her, but she promises that she will come back as soon as she can. At home, Bunny tells of all of the beautiful things and all the wonderful things and how nice the Beast is. Her father doesn't quite believe it and tries to convince her to stay, but she decides to go back. However, she doesn't go back right away. Eventually, when she does go back, she can't find the Beast anywhere except for in the garden, and he is dying. And that is when Bunny realizes that she loves the Beast and that she will surely marry him. And then, Bunny and the Beast get married. However, it is revealed that the prince was under an enchantment, and so he looked like a beast. But the moment that they kiss, the Beast becomes a handsome, handsome prince. And they lived happily ever after. I think pictures that are beautiful and illustrated and show such incredible detail and such marvelous beauty are fundamental for growing readers, because it makes them want to look and turn to the next page, and I think beautiful pictures help really create the story. These are books that I want to pass down to my daughter, if I have a daughter at some point, because they are some of my most favorite and mesmerized books. But now we move on to my more favorite chapter books, the books that I was reading in late elementary school, which would have been 4th, 5th, and 6th grade for me. And I think a couple of them I was reading in 7th grade, but maybe not. So the first book I started reading, I remember in 3rd grade. And it's a harder book to read because this was the first book that introduced me to people with disabilities. And it is a sad book, and it is a hard book, but it's a beautiful book. And I'm very, very glad I read it when I was in 3rd grade. And it is called So Be It. Let me read the snippet on the back for you. Heidi is on a quest. She doesn't know when her birthday is or who her father is. In fact, everything about Heidi and her mentally disabled mother's past is a mystery. When a strange word in her mother's vocabulary begins to haunt her, Heidi sets out on a cross-country journey in search of the secrets of her past. Far away from home, pieces of her puzzling history come together, but it isn't until she learns to accept not knowing that Heidi truly arrives. sending the snippet in the inside. You couldn't really tell about Mama's brain just from looking at her, but it was obvious as soon as she spoke. She had a very high voice, like a little girl, and she only knew 23 words. I know this for a fact because we kept a list of the things Mama said tacked to the inside of the kitchen cabinet. Most of the words were common ones, like good and more and hot, but there was one word only my mother said. Souf. This was one of my favorites, and I think this might have been the first book that I cried at. I've read it a couple of times since, and every time I read it, it becomes more and more poignant and more and more important. I think books like this need to be available to every young reader. Because it deals in some really taboo topics, I would say, such as love and romance between those that are mentally disabled, people having children. It deals with self-identity and beauty. It's a very, very good book. This next one, I think I was reading in 6th grade. And this is a take on Cinderella. It's called Just Ella by Margaret Peterson Haddix. And on the back it says, "It's a familiar story. In spite of the obstacles put in her way by her wicked stepmother, Ella goes to the ball, sweeps Prince Charming off his feet, and is chosen to be his bride. Now she's comfortably ensconced in the palace awaiting marriage to the man of her dreams. It's happily ever after time, right? Wrong. Life for Ella has become an endless round of lessons and restrictions. Even worse, Prince Charming turns out to be more like Prince Boring. Why can't she talk with him the way she can with Jed, her earnest young tutor? Slowly, Ella comes to realize she doesn't want the life she fought so hard to win, but breaking her engagement proves more difficult and dangerous than escaping her stepmother's tyranny." I think this was the first book that I read that had a very, very strong female lead. Ella is, in a sense, in the story alone. She's kind of thrust into the life of the palace with the courtiers and rules and regulations, and she feels like she can't really talk to anybody. And the more time that, the closer that the wedding comes, the more that she realizes she doesn't like the prince. And she begins to really, really like her tutor, her history tutor, who is passionate about people and justice and serving those that are in hardships. And so one evening she decides that she's ready to break the engagement, and she does, and she's put in prison. And she works her way out of the prison and meets her tutor. And I think one of the most powerful moments in this story is the fact that it doesn't necessarily end in a happily ever after automatically. It's alluded to. She is proposed to at the end of the book, but she doesn't accept it right away. And I think that is so cool. I think, give me one moment. He writes a letter to her. And at the end of the letter, he includes, "You inspire me, so will you now wait for me?" And that's because when he proposed, he said that he would wait for her. And I think that's very powerful that at the end of the book, Ella has the chance to figure things out for herself. I recommend this to every young girl who feels that she doesn't have the ability to make her own decisions. I think this is one of the most powerful female inspiring books for young readers. I really do. And it's very, very small. Okay. This next one was one of my favorites for a very, very long time. The Two Princesses of Bamar by Gail Carson Levine. Gail Carson Levine also wrote Ella Enchanted, and I do have that as well, but I didn't read that nearly as many times as I read this book. So the back of this: when plague strikes Bamar, Princess Addie must fulfill an ancient prophecy. Brave and adventurous, Princess Meryl dreams of fighting dragons and protecting the kingdom of Bamar. Shy and fearful, Princess Addie is content to stay within the safety of the castle walls. The one thing that the sisters share is their unwavering love for each other. The tables are turned, however, when the Grey Death leaves Meryl fatally ill. To save her sister, meek Princess Addie must find the courage to set out on a dangerous quest filled with dragons, unknown magic, and death itself. Time is running out, and the sisters' lives and the future of the kingdom of Bamar hang in the balance. This was one of my favorites. I haven't read it in such a long time. But I just remember just loving it. Here. The inside includes a snippet of the book. Perils of the Forest. An ogre, huge, twice my height and 5 times broader. For a moment I stared stupidly at him, and he stared stupidly at me. Then I began to scramble away on my knees. I should have stood and used the boots, but my mind was a blur of fear. He grinned and grabbed my left arm. I tried to pull free, but I couldn't. He had 3 companions, all grinning, their lipless mouths making long cracks in their pasty faces. My wits returned. I stood and I took a step. The ogre came with me. I was dragging him. My arm was going to be ripped away. My shoulder was ablaze of pain. It was worse to see the world rush at me. A stand of trees. We crashed together between them, cracking branches and scattering leaves. The boots slowed and then stopped. The ogre roared and raised his club. I took another step, shrieking from the agony in my shoulder. How long could I pull him? I really, really like this story. Because, and I think at a very young age, I liked how Princess Addie grew throughout the book. I like how she was gentle and sweet at the beginning, meek and mild, and not very brave, and at the end of the book she's done this incredible thing and saved her sister. And again, I think that's a very important book for young girls, because she does a lot of these big, powerful, brave things, like taking on an ogre by herself. This was one of my most favorites up until about 5th or 6th grade. And my most favorite book, a book that I could talk for ages about. Oh, goodness. Is Walk Two Moons by Sharon Creech. I read this book for the first time in 5th grade. And then later that year, actually, my teacher read it to the entire class. And then going into 6th grade, my cousin and I and my grandparents took a road trip out to Wyoming, and my nana, read this book to my cousin and I. I love this book. This is a book that I could read again and again and again and love it just as much. I have a couple other Sharon Creech books. I think I have Chasing Redbirds. I've read a couple others of hers, but I think this one remains my favorite. So here we go. How about a story? Spin us a yarn. Instantly, Phoebe Winterbottom came to mind. I could tell you an extensively strange story, I warned. Oh, good, Grim said, delicious. And that is how I happened to tell them about Phoebe, her disappearing mother, and the lunatic. As Sal entertains her grandparents with Phoebe's outrageous story, her own story begins to unfold. The story of a 13-year-old girl whose only wish is to be reunited with her missing mother. In her own award-winning style, Sharon Creech intricately weaves together two tales, one funny, one bittersweet, to create a heartwarming, compelling, and utterly moving story of love, loss, and the complexity of human emotion. This is a story of beautiful things. First off, I love the writing in this. I mentioned it when I talked about the Wonderball things. There's something humanly mystic, and I don't know if that's the right way to say it, in the writing in this book, but it's simple and it's pure, but it gets right to the root of everything. Sal, here, is the main character, and she has a bit of a rough life. And this is a story of a road trip that she takes with her grandparents to go find her mother. And along the way, she tells them the story of a friend of hers that she met when her and her father moved. And it's funny, and it's good, and it's sweet, and it hurts. And on their road trip, while she's telling the story, her story with her grandparents unfolds. And you get a little bit of Sal's past and why her mother went away. And you get things with the grandparents. And then the ending is sweet and sad and good. And I think Sal actually comes back in Chasing Redbirds, but maybe it's the other one. I don't remember. And actually, the grandparents in this book call Sal their chickabiddy, and for a while that's what my Nana would call my cousin and I. Whenever she'd see us, she'd say, "Hello, my chickabiddies." This is a sweet, sweet book. This might have also been, I think I cried when I read this book. I know that there are sections in here that when my 5th grade teacher read it to us, there were parts that he would let us read aloud, but then there were parts, because of the nature of the story, he would read aloud. My 5th grade teacher was an incredible man to begin with, and I very easily list him as an inspiration to me. But I would say that it is because of him that I read this book. Okay, here we go. So some of the other books that I read, I read Heartbeat by Sharon Creech. I read Ruby Holler by Sharon Creech. Chasing Redbird. I think I read Absolutely Normal Chaos, but I could be wrong. It's a very beautiful book, and I recommend it. I greatly recommend it. If you do a lot of reading now, this book is only 280 pages. You could probably read this in a day. I would love to know your thoughts if you've read this book. It is still one of my favorites. I've read other books, but this is still one of my favorites because of the impact that it's had on my life. you enjoyed these books, and I would love to know if you have any books that you hold on to from your childhood. I will have the second part, books of my late middle school through adulthood, coming very shortly, I promise. And that video will include two of my most favorite books, one that I talked about in video, and multiple very, very thought-provoking books. Okay. I hope you are resting, and I will see you soon.